A lot of times when I make these videos here on YouTube, I kind of assume that you guys have a little bit of knowledge on Blackjack. However, my most popular video here on YouTube was a YouTube short where I was doing a deck count. I was counting through the deck kind of fast, and a lot of the comments were something along the lines of, okay, well, now what? What are you going to do with that information? And this is going to be kind of a reset video, as if you're new to this, or if maybe you're kind of coming across Blackjack or card counting for the first time, you need to know 4 things when it comes to advantage Blackjack. The first is that you need to be playing perfect basic strategy. There is a correct way to play every single hand that you are dealt in Blackjack. No matter what you have versus what the dealer has, there is a right decision and probably a few wrong decisions that you can make in that situation. The next thing that you need to know when it comes to playing advantage Blackjack is the count itself. That's what I was doing in that video, where we assign each of these cards a different value, and we can count as the cards come out and are played. We know exactly what that count is, and that can help inform kind of our future decisions. We're going to get to that here in a little bit. So for example, in these cards here, this is -1, these two cancel, this is worth 0. And so my count currently is at -1. As I kind of keep track of that as I go through the shoe and the different cards are played, now it's back to 0, -1, all right, and then still -1, 0, 1. Okay, I'm keeping track of that number, and that is going to help inform my decision. The next thing that we need to know is how to convert that running count into what's called a true count. A lot of the comments that I got on that video were like, all right, now do it with multiple decks, do it with 6 decks, do it with 8 decks. And okay, sure, we can absolutely do that. In order to do that, we need to get, like I said, what's called a true count. And we get that by taking our running count divided by the number of decks remaining, whether that's a handheld game like you see here, or in a shoe, where we have 6 or 8 decks kind of piled up, and there might be a certain number of those decks that have been played, whereas there's a certain amount of those number of decks that have not been played yet. That's the number that we're going to divide by. Okay, the final step is then learning what's called deviations. And there's 2 different types of deviations. There's betting deviations, where if you're going along and maybe it's a $50 table and you're playing $50, $50, $50. Well, if the count rises, we also need to raise our bets. And so maybe go from playing with $50 if the count goes up to $100, or maybe 2 spots of $100. And maybe eventually we get 2 spots of $200, and so on if the count keeps rising. If the count drops back down, then maybe we have to go back to that minimum bet of $50. So that's going to be one way that the count informs our bets. That's a deviated bet, you might say. Now, the more common deviation that you probably think of when you're counting cards is a playing decision deviation. For example, the most common one or most maybe notorious is when you have a pair of 10s. A lot of people say you should always stand, actually it would be in a high count here, so let's get $500 out there. A lot of people say you should never split your 10s, and usually that's right if you're not a card counter. Okay, well, if you're not a card counter, you probably shouldn't even be playing in the casino. But if you are a card counter and you get 10s versus a dealer's 4, 5, or 6, and the count is high enough, it actually is advantageous to split your 10s. And you would do it like this, and then let's see if it works out here for us. We'd stand on both those. Dealer has 10, 13, and too many. Yeah, we'd win $1,000, okay? So in that situation, it worked out. Now, does card counting and our decisions like this always work out? No, they don't. But a deviation is playing something that's slightly different than what basic strategy says, because of our new informed decision on what the count is telling us. In really high counts, that's typically more advantageous for the player as opposed to the dealer. I'm actually going to leave you with this video right here, which talks about that first step of learning basic strategy and learning all the correct decisions. However, I will put other videos down in the description as well if you're at those other steps on the running count, the true count, deviations, as well as bankroll management.